Amen. Good morning.
Good morning.
Morning.
Good to be with you here today. We're in week 2 of a series we're calling, actually week 3, sorry, of a series we're calling Family Tension. And like last week, I had some fun and exciting awkward family photos, so I thought I'd show some more to you. This first one here, it's always important to pick the scenery that you have in your background because it kind of sets the theme for it. And I know a lot of people like to take their kids to get pictures of Santa Claus and the Easter Bunny, but sometimes the Easter Bunny's a little scary. All right. This next one, I'm not even going to comment on. I'm just going to let you see. This next picture, it looks good, but look, behind that ever present, there's like a hand. I don't know what happened to his brother. This next picture is it's kind of cool. He's slamming the belly into a food. This next one looks good, except the baby. And of course, this next one, you know how they take pictures on roller coasters. Sometimes you don't want that picture, right? Yeah. Well, we are looking at family tension, and like we've been saying, that either we're in family tension, we're just coming out of family tension, or we're one stupid mistake away from being back into family tension. And so we're looking at the Bible and see what it has to say about that very topic. If you were with us last week, what we talked about is that there is a tension that we need to be able to live with. And that's the tension that comes when we look at the real and versus the ideal. Naturally, there's going to be a natural tension that comes with that. Because when we think about our real, that's, you know, we're in our second marriage, or we have no idea how to talk to our kids, or our kids are teens now and they barely want to be with us, or you're newlyweds and it's not as easy as you thought, or you're single and dating is just way harder than they show it on the movies and on TV. Or you're in a great relationship, but you're just kind of waiting for that shoe to drop because you know it can't be this good forever. Or there's people in your family that you're praying for, and every time you even bring up church or God, they just shut you down and walk away. There's a real that all of us are living with. And the tension comes when we look at the ideal, because Jesus shows up and he consistently points to an ideal. He says things like, the kingdom of heaven is like this. He's pointing to an ideal. He says, you've heard it said this way, but I say this. And he's consistently pointing us to an ideal. And the reality is we live in a culture that consistently wants us to water down the ideal so we feel better with ourselves. No matter how dysfunctional or messed up or broken or hurt a relationship might be, there's this tendency we have to water down the ideal so that we feel okay with everything. We're just normal. There's no point pointing to the ideal because we can't live up to it. But the reality is, I think we know deep down that we stick to that ideal. And here's how you know it, I bet, is that when you think of your kids or your grandkids, and you think about their marriage or them having kids, we always go back to the ideal. When our kids get married, we always want that relationship to last forever. When they have kids and they're raising their kids, we want them to raise their kids with an ideal in mind. Deep down, we have that ideal attached to us. But oftentimes we change the ideal to match our experience. Jesus shows up, and what he does is that he lives in the tension. Matter of fact, we said this last week about Jesus, that Jesus taught and pointed towards an ideal, yet refused to condemn those who fell short of it. Jesus shows up, and he never watered down the ideal. Matter of fact, whenever he opened his mouth, what he was doing was raising the standard of the ideal. But at the very same time, he consistently offered grace to everyone who fell short of that ideal. And he was perfectly fine in that tension. He never watered down the ideal to match the culture he was in, but at the same time, he never held back the grace to anyone who needed it and asked for it. So Jesus was perfectly fine in that tension, and as Christ followers, he is inviting us also to live in that tension. Not to water down the ideal, not to withhold grace, but to live in that tension. Like I said, as Christ followers, he's giving us this invitation to be in it. Now, last week we looked at kind of the basic principles of the New Testament. In the Old Testament, if you look at the families in the Old Testament, you look at the big narratives, and what you're going to find about all the families in there is that they're all kind of jacked up a little bit, right? If you go to the Old Testament saying, I want a family I could model my family after, I don't necessarily suggest that. When you're reading the Old Testament in the narratives, understand this. I know a lot of you are doing our Bible reading program. There's this important thing that you need to know. When you're reading the narratives, it's describing what happened, not necessarily prescribing what you ought to do. So in other words, it's describing what happens to a family. It's not necessarily saying you ought to model your family after this. In the New Testament, Jesus shows up, and the writers of the New Testament, they're taking these principles, and now they're trying to apply them to family. Jesus shows up, he teaches some new principles, new ideas, and then Peter and Paul, they take these ideas, and now they're trying to apply them to families. And so last week, this was the summary from last week if you weren't with us, we saw that this is what the New Testament teaches. Husbands, love your wives and be considerate. Wives, submit to your husbands. Children, obey your parents. And fathers, don't exasperate or frustrate your children. These are the ideals that the New Testament is pointing to. And I call them ideals because husbands, it says, love your wife even when she's not lovable. It says, be considerate to your wife even when she's not considerate to you. Wives, it says, submit to your husband even when he doesn't agree with you. Children, obey. Now, right next door, by the way, the kids are doing the same lesson we're doing through this series. And right now, they're learning about kids obeying your parents. And they're thinking to themselves, my parents haven't had an original idea since 1981, right? They still think members-only jackets are cool. They still listen to the Miami Vice soundtrack. I mean, why should I obey them? He says, fathers, don't exasperate your children. And I know there's times when they're driving you nuts, and sometimes when we exasperate them, it just feels like we're returning the favor. And so these are the ideals he's pointing to. And I would say that most families would look at this list and say, fail, 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 fail. You know, most families look at this and think, you know what, that is a hard ideal to live up to. Jesus gives us the ideals, knowing full well what our reality is. The thing is this, as soon as we give up on the ideals, we lose something in our families right now. There is a reason Jesus points us to the ideal and yet gives us grace to stand up again when we fail. Right? So that is what that was a recap from last week. And so today, for fun, I thought we would tackle the most easy, non-controversial one on that list there. That addresses wives and uses the S word. So we're going to be talking about this, and like I said last week, I would say that one of the most misunderstood or misquoted verses in the New Testament in our modern time is the verses on submitting. Matter of fact, even just this week, I was watching cable news, and someone just mentioned the Bible, and another person came back and said, doesn't the Bible say that women should just do whatever their husbands say? And as a reason why not to listen to the Bible at all. I'm going to suggest that not only is that a wrong understanding of it, that when we see the original intent of it, not only is it going to be crazy practical, I'm going to suggest that it can literally change the culture of our family, right? No matter what your current reality is, the principle that he's giving can change the culture, not remove conflict, but take the temperature down a notch if we take this serious. Now, the Bible, let me give you a Bible reading hint. As you're reading through the Bible often gives specific applications for principles that are given to everyone. Oftentimes when you're reading through the Bible, there's a specific applications that are given, but there's a principle that applies to everyone. Let me give an example. Jesus shows up and he talks a lot about love, right? He says the greatest commandment is to love God, and the second one is to love people. And by that, he means all people. Not just the ones we like to hang out with, but all of them. And then later throughout the rest of the New Testament, there's specific examples. Jesus says, you ought to love your neighbor. And it's not just the person living next door to you, the person that's not like you but is sharing in your community. At a different point, he says, love your enemies, right? So he says love everyone, but then gives specific examples, love your enemies. In the New Testament, Paul and Peter, they tell husbands, love your wives. And the principle is to love everyone, but as a specific example, he tells husbands, love your wives. Now, he never says, wives, love your husbands, or children, love your parents, or brothers, love your sisters, except he never says that, but the principle is love everyone. So guess what? Your brother falls into that category, right? Your sister or your kids, they fall into that category. I once had someone say they were struggling with this, the verse about loving your wife because they had a divorce, and say, you know what, this doesn't apply to me anymore because now we're divorced. And so I made them read love your enemies first, right? Because no matter which way you look at it, they're going to fall into the category of everyone. So there's a basic principle that is given to everyone, and then there's specific applications seen throughout the Bible. So in Ephesians chapter 5, verse 21, we get this specific application. Or rather, verse 22. It says, wives, submit yourselves to your husbands as you did to the Lord. And of course, when we read that, we think, what if my husband is a jerk, right? What if he is wrong? What if he does something stupid? And, you know, by the way, ladies, sometimes, every once in a while, a guy will come in and say, I struggle with this verse because my wife is not doing this. And I tell them this. What's the first word in that verse? It's wives. It's not even applying to you. He's not even talking to you. There's enough verses that start with husbands do this, right? You worry about that. Let your wives, the one he's writing to, worry about this. So I got your back on this, right? So notice this is verse 21. It's a specific application. Right before that, that's verse 22. In verse 21 it says this, submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. Submit to one another. In other words, everyone submit to everyone, right? He's saying, brothers, submit to your brothers. People in the church, submit to other people in the church. It's saying, employees, submit to your employers, right? He's giving this basic principle that we're all accountable for, right? And by the way, notice the reason he gives. He says, out of reverence for Christ, right? It's not because the other person deserves it. Not because the other person earned it. It's not even because they think exactly like you do, right? It's saying out of reverence for Jesus, submit to one another. Now, a lot of the reason confusion is for the word submit. What does that mean? Here's a basic definition. Submission is the act of leveraging time, resources, energy, and availability for the purpose of benefiting someone else. In other words, everyone in our family, everyone you know has a deal, right? It's when your kids wake up, when your spouse wakes up, when you see your parents or whoever it is, everyone has a deal that they're working on. We might not understand their deal. We might not get it. We might wish they had a whole different deal. But everyone has a deal every day. Submitting means this, is I'm going to come alongside you. And if I have time or energy or resources that will help you with your deal, I'm going to do that before I work on my deal, right? In other words, I'm going to put you first, right? Now think about this. Before we try to put all the pieces together, what if every member in the family did this to one another, right? What if every member in the family said, you know what, I know you have a deal. I'm going to come alongside you, and I'm going to support you with what you're doing. Maybe you need my time. Maybe you need my energy. Maybe you need my strength. Maybe you just need an ear to listen to you. Before I do my deal, I'm going to come alongside you and help you with your deal. Now, do you understand why if this can be a good thing in a church? It could be a good thing in a workplace. It could be a good thing in a family or in a marriage. If we each look at each other and say, you know what, I know you have something going on. Is there any way I can help you with your deal? And because out of reverence for Jesus. Because that's what Jesus did, right? He submitted to us by dying on a cross for us, right? He submitted to the point of death for us, right? He said, instead of putting myself first, I'm going to die on a cross to benefit you. And instead of looking out for my safety, I'm going to be nailed to a cross so that you can have forgiveness and eternal life, right? So Jesus did it first. And as a Christ follower, understand this, that if we want to be like Jesus, it's not just like in the parts that are easy or benefit myself. Oftentimes, it's in the hard parts that he wants to show us how good he is and what he's up to teach us. So the basic principle that's being taught here is the principle of mutual submission. I'm going to submit to you, and you're going to submit to me. You know, imagine in a family what would happen if everyone was asking this question. Here's the question that comes from mutual submission. The question is this: what can I do to help? What can I do to help? Right? It's a very simple question, but it's the idea that before I do my stuff, I want to see if there's a way that I can help you. And you know, what if everyone in our house did this? Because what we're saying is, I'm loaning you myself. I'm loaning you my time, my energy. I'm loaning you my resources. I'm putting my deal on hold so I can help you out. For kids, if you want to see your parents have a heart attack, there's a couple kids in here. I'm just saying, try this. So, Mom, Dad, what can I do to help? If you really want to get to them, do it when their friends are around, like when there's a party going on. Just walk in front of everyone and say, Mom, Dad, what can I do to help? Right? And if you say it like this, I'm about to watch something on TV that I'm really interested in, but before I do that, is there anything I can help you with? Right? You know, and your parents will be so freaked out, they won't even be able to say anything, right? Wives, when you ask your husband this, what you're saying is, I know you have a burden that you're carrying, but you don't have to do it yourself. Is there anything I can do to help? Husbands, this is a very powerful question, and it's a scary one, right? Because we don't know what they're going to say, right? And the reason, and by the way, there's a good chance your wife is scared to ask for help, right? Because when they ask, they feel resistance, right? There's a good chance your kids, even though they need help, whether they're tiny or grown or maybe not even in the house, they want to ask, but they feel resistance to it, right? Your family has been leaning into you so long that either they've given up or they just fell over and they don't know what else to do. You offering this is opening the door again, right? It's saying, I want to help. I want to be there. And by the way, let me give you a couple people not to be, right? Because like I said, the kids are doing the same lesson. And oh, by the way, we have some family devotionals. If you would like a family devotional on these topics for the next couple of weeks that you can do a little bit each day, they're on the welcome table or also on the kids check-in table. Grab one of those because as a family, if you work through these questions, it could be a big help. But if your kids come home and they say, Mom, Dad, what can I do to help? Don't be the guy or the lady that says, well, it's about time, right? I carried you for 9 months, and it took you 12 years to ask that one question. Don't be that person, right? Don't be the person if your spouse comes to you and says, honey, is there anything I can do to help? Don't be the guy or the girl that says, you know what, you're just asking it because the preacher guy told you to say that, right? Don't do that, right? Maybe this is a brand new concept. Maybe we need to retry it again. If someone in your house tries it, they're probably scared to death. Go easy on them, right? Meet them there, right? Because if we beat them down for doing it, why the heck would they do it again, right? What can I do to help? Ephesians, like I said, Ephesians 5:21 says, submit to one another out of reverence for Jesus, because that is what he did. The biggest barrier, of course, from us asking that question is fear, right? Because what if they actually say something, right? What if they take advantage of us? What if they, take us off our task, or our deal doesn't get done because they're helping with us with our deal, right? Jesus, we do it out of reverence for Jesus. Jesus was looking at the world, and it was a mess, so he went to God the Father and said, Father, the world's a mess. Is there anything I can do to help? The Father said, you don't want me to answer that question. Right? Jesus said, I want the answer to that question. The world is a mess. Is there anything I can do to help? God the Father said, well, you're going to have to die. And Jesus said, I can do that. God the Father said, you don't understand. You're going to have to be second, right? You're going to go to a people that you created, and they're going to take advantage of you. You're going to go to the people that you created and you love, and they're going to take you for granted. They're not going to understand what you're doing. They're going to take what you give them and then forget about you, right, and not give you anything back. And Jesus said, I can do that. Right? We do it out of reverence for Christ because he did it first for us. Amen. It's not about whether the other person deserves it. It's not even about whether the other person is going to give it back to me. Please don't be the guy that says, I'm going to do it for her as long as she does it for me. Because that's not submission. That's like manipulation to get what you want, right? If we do it out of submission, we're saying, what can I do to help? Because Jesus did it first. And I want to be like Jesus. Now, let me just say this, because I know not everyone here is a Christ follower. And by the way, if you're not, we are glad that you're here. Matter of fact, to a degree, we've built this place so that you feel comfortable checking things out. Let me just say that this question, you could go home and do, and you don't even have to give credit to the church, right? You could pretend it's your own idea, right? You wait a couple of days so they don't think you got it from church. You could just say, start asking the question, what can I do to help? And by the way, you could do it at your job. Imagine what your employer would say if you said, before I get working on my stuff, what can I do to help you, right? But here's the thing. When you are doing it for a couple weeks and you notice the temperature and the culture of your workplace or your family life, you feel it going down, understand, don't give credit to the Journey Church. Give credit to Jesus. Amen. It was his idea, right? And if for the Christ followers in this room, understand something, that he's not just asking us to do it for a reason, for no reason. He's up to something in it. Now let me just say this, that sometimes we do it because we hope it changes the heart of the other person. And sometimes it does. But I will promise you this, if you do it, it will change your heart. If you say, I'm going to give up my stuff for the purpose of them, our hearts will be different. Things will be different. The question forces us to lean into people instead of pulling away from them. There's all kinds of reasons that we pull away. There's one reason why we pull in, and that's out of reverence for Jesus. Now, here's the question that always gets asked, and it's a natural question. And it's, what does this mean if we're talking about mutually submitting to one another? Does that mean like no one's in charge and like nothing ever gets done because we're just sitting around saying, well, no, let's do what you want to do, and let's do what you want to do, and nothing ever gets done? Here's the thing. This is not a question about authority. It's a question about our hearts, right? It's a question about the condition of our heart, not who's in charge. Now, let me show you why. Because in Colossians 1:18, it says this. It says, Christ is also the head of the church, which is the body. It says that Jesus is the head. He has authority over the church, right? What does he do with that authority? Well, he dies for the church, right? That's what he does with his authority. And I haven't met every human being to walk the planet, but I've never met anyone who said, Jesus can't be the head of the church because he submitted, right? He submitted his will for the purpose of the church. He can't be the head of it. Matter of fact, the reason he's the head of the church is because he died for the church. Now, I would even say this. The reason that I made Jesus the leader of my life is because when I realized how much he gave up for my benefit, of course I'm going to make him the leader of my life, right? He doesn't even have to make me follow him. I want to follow him. Here's the thing. I know, guys, if you're here, you want to be the leader of your home, and I think that's a noble thing. But following Jesus' footsteps. If you die for your family, they're going to want to give you authority, right? They're going to want to follow you. If you consistently say, you know what, before I do my deal, before I finish what I'm up to, I want to help you because we're all important. I might not understand your deal, but if it's important to you, it's important to me. Let's do it together. The reality is, you know what? It won't be a question of who's in charge. They'll want to follow you, right? I follow Jesus because of what he gave up for me, right? In Romans chapter 5, verse 6, it says this. It says, when we were utterly helpless, Christ came at just the right time and died for us sinners, right? Notice it says, when we were utterly helpless. In other words, we couldn't give anything back to him, right? We didn't have anything to offer. We couldn't work out an exchange where he died on the cross and then we did something nice for him or something like that. We were utterly helpless. And it says, at the right time, he died for us. It's not when it was convenient for us. It wasn't even when there was nothing on TV or in between baseball and basketball season or whatever it is, right? It's at just the right time, he died on the cross for us, right? It's not a matter of, we're not talking about convenience. We're not talking about what is easy for us. The reality is when we are submitting to one another, we're putting others' needs before our own. And in the family culture, if everyone in the home, everyone in the workplace, everyone in the church is thinking about the other person, I'm not saying it will remove conflict. Conflict will still be there. There'll still be disagreements. We'll still say and do crazy things to each other, but it'll take the temperature down. If the other person knows that you're in it because of them, you're in it to help them, and there's no one more important, but we're working together, it's going to take the temperature down. The big question, what can I do to help, becomes the big challenge for the day, right? Because I know as I'm talking, you're thinking about someone, and maybe they're sitting next to you, so I'm not going to make you hold up hands or pass the microphone around or something, but here's the deal. Who can you ask today, what can I do to help you, right? It might be someone in your home. It might be a family member who's not around but might need you. The question is this. When we submit, when we suspend our deal to help someone else with their deal, what we're doing is communicating that you are just as important as my stuff. And honestly, there's a lot we can do and say, but this can change the culture of a family. I'm going to encourage you. I'm guessing every one of us knows who we ought to do that to or say that to. If you have the guts, if you have the courage, try it, right? Maybe just try it for a day, try it for a lifetime, and see what it can do in the culture of a family. Let's pray together.